Afternoon, everybody. Happy to be back today. I don't even know when this episode's going to post anymore. I'm trying to get as many in the can as possible because I think for a good 9 months it was a lot of radio silence. I'm trying to avoid that now. And while everybody, will talk about, quality over quantity in the internet fame game, it's quantity bar nothing. So how's everybody doing? I would say, let me say this. I'm going to talk today about something that probably will be a bit of a dry topic. I'll try to introduce some humor into it, my insights, some caffeine-induced paranoia. I want to talk about business and what it means to be helping in the capacity that I have focused my career, what it means to be helping a business and supporting it, and what I've been learning in the last about year as my career kind of changed. I'll explain a little bit of my past. I think I've said before in previous episodes, I went down a bizarre path. I had no intention of doing it when I got to university. I kind of went into business hoping to eventually get an MBA, I guess. Never ended up doing that, weirdly. And ended up going down this accounting path that led me to a Canadian CPA. Well, it was a CA back then, Chartered Accountant. They've now changed the designation, which was actually the worst for the people that got my kind of accountant designation, because so the Americans have CPAs. Canadians are now also called CPAs, but before we were called CPAs, we were classed into three different categories. CGAs, which were certified general accountants. CMAs, which were chartered management accountants. I think it was chartered general accountants, chartered management accountants, and then you had chartered accountants. And the chartered accountants were the ones that had to do the audit articling and do arguably the most training, work, development courses to get their designation. So when they merged those three orders into one, it was the CAs that lost out the most. Who could have seen that coming when I started the process, though? Anyway, long story short, I went down that path. I did my audit work in an accounting firm. Through that audit work, I saw a lot of small businesses. What's really interesting, audit is not, to give you an idea for those of you that are interested in business metrics, the churn rate, at least it was back then, almost 20 years ago, the churn rate of people that get hired to article at accounting firms as junior staff accountants that actually end up making it to, I think, the manager level, which will be about 4 years in on a standard career track, or 5 years in on a standard, or it was 5 years in on a standard career track, is 80%. The churn rate is 80%. 2 out of 10 make it to manager. The rest of us leave as soon as we're done our hours. So, not a fun place for most people. You really have to love audit. You have to love financial statements. You have to love testing. And you have to be either love or be okay with the fact that in that world, until you kind of hit the senior staff or manager level, the boss you work for will change every mandate, or almost every mandate that you get. So every client that you work on to help them close their year and get their audited financials or their review done or whatever, Generally, as a junior staff accountant, you'll have a different manager, a different partner on top of the manager. And in my experience, I was always working with small clients. There was a team back then that was dedicated to public companies. So the public company teams were generally more cohesive because the public company audits, the big fish, those would be, there were mandates that ran all year. Like, they would go off the file for a few weeks and then they would be back on that file doing quarterly reviews, yearly audits, quarterly reviews, yearly audits, right? All for the public sector. But I was in the private clients, and private client mandates obviously much, much, much smaller. A week or 2 week of field work, following a couple weeks of some back and forth with the client on some final bits, closing up the final review, and then preparation of the financials, which was really handled by the manager and the partner. I churned out of that, obviously. Didn't really love audit because, honestly, like, when I got into it, I remember going my first day, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I had no idea what I was starting. Was made to stand in front of a photocopier for a week, which, by the way, I think more people of younger generation should be made to do some crap work when they start their career, pay their dues. I was also given to read a stack of dry legal invoices, I remember, in French, which is not my first language, to check, standard audit check for. You'd be surprised to find out, those of you that are in business, when the auditors ask for all the legal bills, they're not asking because they don't believe the number that you're saying you paid in legal bills. They're asking because they need to check the legal bills because the lawyers have a requirement to disclose if they're fighting a lawsuit for you. And that's really what we're looking for. Is the company being sued and we don't know about it, or they haven't told us? Because that might present, obviously, something to be said in the financials if there's a lawsuit pending. Anyway, I don't know why I went off on that tangent. Yay, BZ. Red Bull gives you wings to go in the wrong direction. I got out of audit. I got into the technology business. I started in a company that was on the fast track to growth. There were bumps in the road, but generally that company was, every year was leaps and bounds ahead of the year before. Yeah, typically when a business is in high growth, that means their income, or their revenue, more to the point, their revenue, their top line is growing, by leaps and bounds every year. It's actually cash that struggles the most in those cases. They don't have the fuel to service the revenue that they're pushing towards. So that presents a challenge, but it's a good challenge. Any business person will tell you, I'd rather have the problem of growth than the problem of shrinkage, right? Growth and shrinkage. Pool jokes. Then I worked for a long period in a business that was growing, but kind of had a stability, a plateau issue. So again, business was doing quite well, managed very well. And when I say managed, I mean the people that I worked for were very intelligent, experienced, professional executives that had a very wise and cautious way of approaching running a business that, while there were some hiccups, they were very short-lived, very temporary, and generally just saw us growing into the future, which was really a good learning pool for me. And then now I have more experience in a business that grew a lot, plateaued, suffered a small downswing, and whose management team is young. Not unintelligent, extremely smart, just young. And the challenges that go with that. in all of the cases of the businesses I've worked for, I've really come to appreciate the vision that the entrepreneur and ultimately the person with the most stress and the most to lose by an exponential factor in their vision. As an accountant, I'm very risk averse. And to suddenly pick up and commit myself to an absolutely new idea on which there are no guarantees, to have the confidence, to have that drive and that belief that it will work, because if you don't have that belief, it won't. That almost insane cult-like obsession to make an idea a reality, I really respect. And I've gotten behind the entrepreneurs that I've worked for and have a huge respect for them. Now that my career has grown a bit and I've lost my hair, I've lived through this pandemic thing. I've worked for a bunch of different people, bunch of different personalities. And that's not on the entrepreneur side, although they varied as well. But really also in the executives that I've worked for and with, be them CFOs or chief operating officers or heads of sales or, VPs of marketing, heads of HR. I've seen a lot of different personalities and a lot of different things. Some of them I've agreed with more, some less. But one thing that I've consistently seen in my experience is that companies, especially in the small sector, that in the world that I've lived in, which is kind of the company that's looking for growth and looking for that next level, I can imagine a very established company, either like a real estate investment trust or, a garment company or, just anything that's an established business will generate its own cash. They don't really need help. So long as the business is steady, they're steady, the cash is there, they're fine. Like I said, growth requires fuel. Fuel is cash in business. And the one thing I've noticed is that there's a lot of offers to help small businesses, and you'll constantly hear on the news about government programs and grants. And then what you don't hear about as much, but it's more present if you're in the business world, is offers for lines of credit, term financing meaning, so a line of credit is something like a rotating credit line that you would get personally, where you borrow and you repay as you need. It has no real fixed term, but you have to respect some conditions. You don't generally get a revolving line of credit personally, right? And then a term finance would be something like a mortgage with a fixed repayment date and a set schedule, set interest rate. There's lots of those offers. All the banks offer it. There are peri-government or quasi-government institutions and crown corporations that offer it. There are third-party, non-regulated banks that offer financing on different levels, whether it be, working capital, which is basically to say you're growing, but you don't have the cash to get to that next level of revenue. So here's some lending to get you there over the next 5 years, and then in 5 years, you'll be sustainable at that new level. Or you're fueling a new business line or a new office, and you need some startup capital to build an office somewhere or build a small assembly shop or do whatever. There's lots of offers for financing. And I found mostly that a lot of creditors are really good. So long as you respect their conditions, they're pretty good. But, and I imagine I've lost most of you at this point, but if you know business, you know that business is not a guarantee. And any story of any entrepreneur, I think, will be riddled with ups and downs. And what I find really shocking is how fast people will absolutely do a 180 on you the moment they smell a difficult challenge. And what I mean by that is, especially from where I sit, which is more the finance support, what I mean by that is, I'll give you an example. When a business works with a bank, they open up their operating bank accounts. So that's the bank accounts they'll pay their suppliers from, run their payroll out of, receive collections from their clients to, they'll deposit the checks to that account. So like you and I with our checking accounts, that's what they are. Same thing. A business can also have savings accounts where they park money at a higher interest rate. But businesses also, like I said, they operate generally with a credit facility with a bank. And they will operate with what's called like a line of credit. That line of credit can be calculated in different ways. Basically, the bank will offer you a maximum, saying, okay, I'm going to give you up to $1 million of credit, revolving credit. So it's not to say that immediately, if your bank balance was $200,000 for your company, that once you sign that deal, you have $1.2 million available to you, basically. It doesn't work like that. The way that a revolving line of credit works is the bank says, yeah, it's maximum $1 million, but we're going to do a calculation of what will actually allow you to borrow. And that calculation, depending on the kind of business, it can be a percentage of what your clients owe you at any given time, called your accounts receivable. It can be a multiple of things like recurring revenue. So if you think of a company like, I'll do a dumb example because it won't work like this, but something that people can relate to. Some people pay LinkedIn every month for their user subscription, right? We all get a free LinkedIn. It offers certain features, and if you try to click on LinkedIn and do certain things, like look up certain things or anything like that, they'll say, oh, that's LinkedIn Premium. You need to pay for that. When you do pay for it, that's for LinkedIn. That's a subscription. And if you don't unsubscribe, it renews automatically every month, and that for LinkedIn is what we call recurring revenue. So sometimes when banks see that, especially in a software company, there's a lot of recurring revenue. That is, once the client's signed up, there's a general trend of how many clients will stay on. They can give a certain faith that even if the client isn't invoiced yet, even if it's in the future, there is a certain amount of money that will constantly be there, especially if there's a track record. I'm probably losing a lot of you at this point, but that's another way that they can lend you the money. Most lines of credit, especially for young companies, especially in high growth, will come with a lot of conditions. Oh, you have to make a certain amount of profit at year end. You have to respect some ratios of how much you're borrowing against how much has been put in by the shareholders of the company. So you can't finance the company entirely through debt and have the shareholders put in nothing and basically have nothing at stake. That's another way that banks secure themselves, to know that the shareholders are in it to a certain degree before they step in. But what's funny is I've noticed that nothing will go according to plan. And when there's a breach of those conditions, the sales pitch is always, we'll work with you to help it work, and the bank is saying, well, we're offering you this credit facility and we want to work with you to help you grow and maintain, and we're there when there are challenges. But what I've noticed is that when those challenges hit, man, bankers will become very heavy-handed indeed. And when there's more significant challenges, bankers can start to become an impediment to a business's turnaround. And that is because they will figuratively hold a shotgun to your head and tell you to toe a line until either you leave or you've satisfied them. And the reason I guess I'm a little bit... Listen, there are no friends in business. I get it. I understand that. And I know that speaking from my personal perspective, I don't think, and that's why I think I'm not an entrepreneur, I don't have that cutthroat attitude towards other people off the cuff. You have to piss me off to get me to be that way. I have gone that way with people, but they've always struck first. I'm a counter fighter. I've always been, even in my martial arts training, I'm a counter fighter. I don't think it's particularly useful to be a counter fighter, because, the old axiom, the best defense is a good offense. But what I will say is that it's tiring and it's stressful to manage kind of these people that at the end of the day would sleep just as easily if they ran you out of house and home. They wouldn't care. And the way their jobs are set up is that they can't, because their jobs are on the line to make sure that they toe their rules and they report to their bosses that things are getting done. And so much of this stress, I think, would be resolved with meetings with the right people. If the entrepreneur in the company that's borrowing from the bank could meet with the decision maker at the bank about this and discuss, there would be a more equitable, amicable, and understandable solution to the struggle, rather than sending down basically a goon in a suit who has no decision power, who only reports to his superiors, and who couldn't care less. Unless you are and it's the same in personal, right? So the very rich will get the best service. In business, the very biggest will get the best service. The smallest get triaged. Whereas the biggest stress should be on the biggest business, because that's the biggest exposure for the bank, and the rest of us should be more cushioned. I know, that doesn't make financial sense. But it's just been a heck of a ride the last few months. And I will say that I'm seeing the company do turnarounds. And this place only has positive things in its future. Only positive. and a really good leadership team, even if they're young and very passionate. And I think that that really counts for something that is lost on somebody like a banker. And that's sad. I think if I'm going to round this out, man, this went way longer than I thought. To a certain degree, it's just like social media. Business started getting done on spreadsheets and through emails, and we lost something at that point. It's so much easier to cut off the guy you've never met face to face. It's so much easier to send an email saying you're done than it is to call an entrepreneur on the phone or meet with him face to face and do the same. And there's so much, and everybody's so short-staffed that reputation is losing currency and value in the modern business world. Used to be that if you were to do somebody dirty like that, you'd be out of business. It would be known very quickly that you were not to be contracted with because, you're a two-faced business person. But now it's so difficult to get anything done that anybody's just happy to get even a return email anymore, let alone golden customer service. I don't know. The whole point of this rambling tirade was to just say that a business in a tough spot is a tough spot for everybody. I sympathize with the entrepreneurs who are, I can't imagine that I would sleep if it was my business. And I imagine a lot of them struggle to sleep. But I think they would sleep a lot easier if the world of finance remembered its own humanity.